Thank you. Mr. Zlotnick, and then after Mr. Zlotnick, Mr. Riopel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council members, Greg Zlotnick with the state and federal contractors. First of all, I just want to thank you and the staff again for the diligence and I guess constant efforts to keep this moving forward and improved. I think there's been a lot of progress. As you're hearing this morning, we're not quite there, and hopefully we'll get some changes that will improve it. I just want to go through the document and start in the first paragraph, second to last line. We're concerned about the use of the word significant. I think, Martha, you answered a question about that and talked about West Basin and showing percentages. The issue, the word is vague. Nobody really knows.
Would you like insignificant?
No. Well, actually, if you'd like a suggestion, I would suggest actually what you have in your document in the item 3 at the bottom where it says measurable. If you want to keep that in, because I know Martha does want to leave the opportunity for agencies that actually do an absolute reduction and to satisfy it. I don't know a lot that are going to do that, but it's a possibility. And the use of measurable would be consistent with what's in your document down below. The other issue when you get into percentages, of course, is that how do you determine what's significant, utilizing that as a metric, is that a 1% reduction at a wholesaler may be equivalent to 30% at an individual agency in terms of actual volume of water. So, what's the intent of what you're trying to do? So I think that that's important to take into account. So we would suggest that change from significant to measurable if you want to keep that in. We certainly support the language that Ag Urban suggests at the end of the first paragraph. Again, this gets to the issue of not having a potentially moving baseline. You need to be able to measure, compared to what you otherwise would have. We think that's a clarity issue. And as others have said, this council may know and the staff may know what they mean by this, but future councils may have a different interpretation unless we can have clarity in the language. In the second paragraph, just want to say we really appreciate that intent language. We talked about it before and think it does explain what you're trying to do. And so we appreciate that not only being there, but also being moved up into sort of introductory language. In the policy itself, at the outset, we believe that you should include explicitly that, as I believe an early version, it may be the one that Mr. Nordoff referred to, said that covered actions that seek to export, transfer, whatever, that would add clarity. The use of the term, your term, proposed action in the second paragraph is intended to cover that, I'm sure, but as you've heard and we've discussed at other meetings, that term doesn't have a lot of clarity, not only to those of us that have been following this very closely, but certainly someone who hasn't been involved may not know exactly what that means and may interpret it more broadly than intended. 85075.5 is the covered action section of the statute. No, right, but it says for the purposes it covers proposed action. I just think it would be clear. It's just clarity. It doesn't change anything. So we think that would be important. Okay. Then in item 1 in the first paragraph, we would support, instead of one or more water suppliers, changing it to region or service area that receive the water. Again, this gets to, you're trying to promote the policy in 85021, which talks about statewide strategy and regions, and we just think that's a consistency issue there as well, let alone the management issues on the ground. In terms of the compliance with urban water management plans, Ms. Davis made the comment about probably 80, I think you said something in the 80% range, and then when you looked at everything specifically, maybe 50%. I think another thing to think about is that I would be surprised, Martha may know better, probably does, but if the actual amount of water being delivered in the state that is being delivered by agencies that aren't compliant is probably can't be less than 90 to 95% of the water actually delivered in the state. So you may have a number of small agencies that haven't complied for whatever reason, but when you're actually talking about the amount of water that you're talking about in the aggregate, the major water suppliers are in compliance, and so I just think it's important to recognize
they have submitted their water management plans.
Well, they're compliant with law would be, yeah. No, but the point is you can say that 50% of the plans may not have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, but in terms of the amount of water you're talking about that is being managed and delivered that's not in compliance is going to be very small compared to that will be. It's just a point to think about.
Isn't that a fact, not yet in evidence, as we always say? That's an argument, and it may even be true.
Right. Well, and I'm just saying, I think before you take, if you hear 50% aren't in compliance, there's an assumption that means there's all this water that's being delivered out of compliance. I'm just putting that on the table as a consideration. And
Okay.
the expectation is that 95% is probably in compliance. So it's not, it's a solution in search of a problem, put it that way. In paragraph 2, where you talk about and appreciate the scheduling language that was put in, but you still have the of all programs, that isn't, we don't think it's necessary. We think it adds confusion. And frankly, it's not even the language you have in your example. The all was not used in the example language. And so we would suggest taking that out and just say consistent with the implementation schedule, programs and projects, blah, blah, blah. I raised at the last meeting that item 3 was of some difficulty. I think that although Mr. Fiorini indicated that if you reported you weren't doing something, you were still in compliance as long as you were reporting. But I do think that the ag-urban language change in the last paragraph to that reduced reliance instead of to be evaluated would solve that problem, because you could point to that and saying, yes, we're doing this, and so that whatever level it is, but it would solve that question, because if you're not able to put a significant, let's say, since that's in there, number in your plan to satisfy number 3, you become a target immediately, and instead of saying we're doing what we can, and that's those things that are identified as that would reduce reliance. So those are the specific comments related to the document, and would suggest those changes. And just for the record, I don't want to get into it too deeply, but I think Ms. Kelm raised the point that on that section 10608.8 about not requiring a reduction in total water used. That's part of the issue here. We've discussed this before. Again, we do not believe that the council should be getting into this agency by agency measurement. We don't think 85021 looked at that. And we do think that the notion that reduced reliance requires an absolute reduction in use is inconsistent with the law, both in SBX 7, which explicitly states that, and the fact the legislative history changed from reduced dependence to reduced reliance. So just want that on the record.
Okay.
And appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Slotnick. Mr. Rio, I'm sorry, Ms.
Yes.
Gray?
Have those language changes or proposed changes been submitted to Joe, or?
No, because we
Are
just got these today. Except, well, the ag-urban changes, we would support those two on the ag-urban. I believe the unattributed that you have, the second, has the red line at the beginning of RP1. The policy shall apply to covered actions, and we would support that as well. And then the others, the other little ones, I can submit them, but and give them to Joe handwriting if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's do it.